at the core of the Gene Keys is how can I best serve the whole? The change that needs to happen isn't a change to society. It isn't a change to our politics. And all of those things are not in great condition. I agree. However, the way that that change happens is by changing your heart. And when one person changes their heart and is able to be open, then when I'm in relationship with somebody else, my aura is going to unlock their heart. And then the next heart and the next heart. And that's how we look around, and we're in a different world.
This as a foundational tool to constantly be able to come back to, you don't have to guess. That's how I experience it. And every day it feels like a miracle, because the quality of my consciousness and feeling tone or frequency within has shifted so much that I don't even feel recognizable. It's completely changing my way of being in the world. I'm not trying to sound over the top here. I'm so sincere. This is how it really can be. Hey there, Soul Fam. Welcome back to another episode of Fire and Soul, the space to deepen your divine alignment and further activate your inner awakening. And that's exactly what today's conversation is going to do. If you've been curious about the Gene Keys, but like many, it's been elusive and confusing and complex, and maybe you've given up to try to figure it out, today's guest will help bring it home in a way that's really grounded and practical, and hopefully will open you up with some inspiration and curiosity to want to further your voyage deeply into the Gene Keys, because it has not only changed my life in many ways, but it has also saved my life. And I'm talking about quality of consciousness. Moving out of the shadow frequency that is by design, by the way, and into the gift that the shadow has to reveal. And then up into the siddhi, the Sanskrit term for the ultimate attainment of our purpose for being on this planet at this time. There's no mistake that we have found one another and that we are on this path and quest to continue to want to know ourselves through God, as God, with God. And that really ultimately is the pathway of the Gene Keys up into the heart, which is getting with God. Beautiful, beautiful. Jay Cohen is such a phenomenal teacher too. And what a background, overcoming his heroin addiction based on just deep need to soothe some really tough parts of his childhood that he definitely shares, moving into the Marines, and then as an entrepreneur, and then finally finding his way to where he is now, which is teaching the Gene Keys, transformational tools and wisdom that is of the highest service on his heart and reason for being on this planet. You're going to love this conversation. I think that it will open you up to oh yeah, I could actually begin to get this. And perhaps you'll feel called to journey deeper. And that is my greatest wish, that you are working with this beautiful foundation that is utterly life-shifting. So without further ado, my friends, please enjoy a journey into the Gene Keys to get with God with Jay Cohen. Jay Cohen, such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome to Fire and Soul.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
We were connecting beforehand and I was already getting a little emotional. I'm just so present to, first of all, how important the Gene Keys are to the evolution of humanity. And I know that you feel the same. I also really want to introduce this concept in another way, because I brought on my friend and teacher of the Gene Keys, Christopher August, to the show a few months ago. And quite a few of our listeners and viewers kind of globbed on, and it makes me so happy to see that. And then one of the students in one of his classes actually had found you, or I would say universe, God, the divine brought you to her. And then she shared one of your videos, which was how to read a Gene Keys profile. That was the first video that I want to give a shout out to Joanne, because I know she's listening. She shared with me, and she just shared it with me directly. And then I shared that also with every single person that I coach and that I'm in groups with, either as a student or as the guide. And they were like, oh, I'm able to understand this in a way that I hadn't previously. So because this has been so profound for me and every single person that I work with, and it's not only, I say, changed my life, but in many ways, Jay, saved my life. And I think you could probably relate to that. I would be remiss if we didn't just really unpack this. And so my intention here is to have an introductory It's a complex system, as you know. It's so beautiful when you finally allow yourself the patience and grace to get into it and to really allow yourself to open to what's available to us. And so I want to have you back, hopefully many times, to just really get into the deep and narrow. But with all that said, a little bit of you and whatever you feel called to share about your background, and then how you were brought also to the Gene Keys, or when they came into your awareness.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for sharing that video and for taking the time. That's like an hour-long video, and it's just like almost a PowerPoint presentation with my little face in the corner. And it still, to this day, touches me that people are sitting there for that long and taking it in. My YouTube channel, really, when I created it, was for me. The way that I really let wisdom come into me is to organize it and then share it with the world. And I know when I can do that, that it's not just up here, but it's made its way down into my being, which is really what ultimately the Gene Keys are all about. Backstory wise, I've had a pretty crazy life, to be honest with you. I've been all over the map. I grew up in a really rough and tumble city outside of Boston called Brockton. Lots of fighting, lots of drugs, lots of just rough and tumble growing up. My parents were both drug addicts and alcoholics. My mom had a suicide attempt when I was 3 years old. My dad left when I was 5 years old. And everything in my life, because of those things, was me trying to prove that I was lovable and worthy of doing things in the world. Fast forward until I was 12, I found alcohol, and then very quickly thereafter cannabis. And then by the time I was 15 years old, I had found cocaine and ecstasy, and not ecstasy, I'm sure, as everyone can imagine, in like a setting that is useful, but just in a party scene, trying to numb out and not pay attention to anything. And then by 16, I had picked up OxyContin, and within 6 months was a full-blown heroin addict. So from 16 to 21, my life was just full of shadow and darkness, and there was a lot of figuring out how I was going to get high every day and doing things that to this day I'm still coming to terms with, and friends dying and going to jail. And unfortunately, it continues to happen to this day. But when I turned 21, I knew that I needed to get out of there. And I knew at that point there was a reason that I was still around, and I wasn't sure what it was, but so many of my friends had passed that I didn't understand. And it's still something that I struggle with a little bit. I don't know if it's survivor's guilt or what, but there's a part of me that still struggles with that. And so I decided at that point to join the Marine Corps. And this is one thing that the Gene Keys helped me with, actually. I realized that my solution was to run from thing to thing to thing, trying to change the external circumstances to make me feel better inside. And time again, I wound up in the same place, just in a different area, and I did stop the drug use, but still I was trying to fill a hole. There was no peace inside of me. So I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and then finished up my degree, owned a pretty successful business after that. So from 2016 until just this past November, I owned a gym that focused really on integrating mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. So it was a lot more than just a gym. Nonetheless, it was a brick and mortar business. And in November, I just decided it didn't align with who I was anymore and decided to shut it down. And that was largely because of the Gene Keys. And this time I was certain that this was something that was being asked of my soul, because from a financial standpoint, from the circumstances of my life, like outside looking in, I should have been happy there, and I just knew that it wasn't quite right. So going back a couple of years, because that was 2023 that I shut that down. Back in 2020 is actually when I had my first exposure to the gene keys.
Mm.
And it came about, part of my path has been plant medicine, especially in the earlier phases.
What kind?
And it was psilocybin to start. And then I've also sat with ayahuasca 2 different weekends. So a total of 5 times for those.
Yeah.
And in that initial psilocybin journey, somebody that I was sitting with brought the gene keys and used it as their intention, one of their gene keys as their intention for ceremony.
Mm.
And at that point, no spark, nothing sort of lit up in my brain. It just was something that I took in. My medicine woman brought me on after maybe 6 or 8 months. She just saw something in me, and I've been told that I bring this kind of stability or like this pillar of safety places that I go. And so she asked me to come in and start to learn how to I don't know if the goal is ever to facilitate, but just how to be in that space and how to engage with people in a way that helps them get through their blocks and get through into the next phase of the process. And then fast forward another couple years. So now we're in 2022. The first time I went to go sit with ayahuasca, the Gene Keys book was everywhere. And I mean everywhere in that place.
Like amongst the participants?
And in the actual temple itself, they had a couple different copies. I mean, it was everywhere.
Could it be more obvious?
Exactly. And so at that point, I was like, okay, it piqued my interest. I went home, and from that day, which was in June 2022, I have not put it down. I'm talking hours a day of study and digging in. Like, it just took a hold of me and has really changed who I am and what I do.
So beautifully shared. Thank you. And I relate on many, many levels. But before I offset with a little bit of my story and coming into the Gene Keys, how has it changed you in ways that, mind blowing?
So
literally.
well, yes, very much so. Man, there's so many, it's hard to choose. I would say one of the biggest is slowing down.
Yeah.
It taught me that I don't need to constantly do and strive and act. That's a big part for me, is because I grew up the way that I did, I felt like I needed to be a certain way or things were going to fall apart. And so the Gene Keys has helped me come into myself and to trust that what I'm saying is going to be impactful without needing to act a certain way or to do a certain thing. Of course, it's deep in my relationship to God and to just trusting that things are going to be okay and they're happening for a reason. We have all of these myths and stories from the Buddha to the Bible that tell us that we are supported and we are safe and everything's going to be okay. And yet we choose to align to this messaging that's in the collective at large, that if you don't kill yourself, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah, right. Just the push, force, prove, produce mentality that is infused with fear and lack energy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's this planet. I mean, Schoolroom Earth is not an easy planet to be on. You know, I've heard you mention, even as recent as this morning, I don't know how many videos I have binged of yours. That one, by the way, that you said, gosh, people, an hour of their time just to learn how to read a Gene Keys profile. I want you to know that I watched that video 4 times. Because that's even after I was deep into like at least 5 months of study already, of just the first 4, which we'll explain some of that maybe as we go. But there were things that you were sharing that were opening up in me, and I just hadn't really learned in that way. And it was so activating to my soul. Oh, like I remember I was still in Calabasas because I've about a month ago moved to Austin, and my listeners and viewers know that. But I was kind of like just kind of resting, watching it, I think for the 4th time on my bed. I don't keep my laptop or phone in my room, but like I was like, let me just rest because my bed was so comfy. And let me watch this one more time, and see if there's something else. And I remember like 3 different times laying down, having to sit up. Wait, what did he just say? So even the 4th time, it was still that's how beautiful and deep and complex this is, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, my intention whenever I am recording something is to try and ground this down a little bit, because it's such an expansive, massive topic, and it's so easy to get lost in the details, honestly. But ultimately, this system is here to teach us one thing, and that is that there is a God that is looking out for you. And when you actually believe that, the way that you live your life totally changes.
Ah, yeah. Oh, so beautiful. Sorry. Pardon me for like being so expressive.
Please.
What I experience of how that moves through me as, okay, that's the essence of knowing that there is this divine being, this ultimate creator. God is definitely a word that has come back into my vocabulary the past many years after being raised on a steadfast diet of new age, spiritual community rhetoric, which a lot of that served and a lot of it just no longer does. Like, but the way that it expresses through my experience on this planet at this time is through open heartedness, right? And forgiveness and compassion, all those qualities of Christ consciousness. And so for me, it's like if I look at like the shadow almost like being this evolutionary upward spiral, not that there's any hierarchy of good or bad, the shadow's master teacher, right? Fear is a master teacher. And within shadow resides the gift. So being willing to be with the shadow, being willing to face the hardest, darkest, ugliest parts of myself, so that as divine law speaks to, as within, so without, then I'm able to be with anything on my path. That's part of what we're all beginning to see here on planet Earth. But also, it allows me to move more into, expand courageously into oneness.
Yeah, I, I,
That is
I
God.
think that people oftentimes, one of the most common questions that I get is, how do I get out of the shadow here? And I think it's really important to understand that the goal isn't to get out of the shadow. The
Mm,
shadow is a part of who you are, and it will always be a part of who you are.
mm,
The beauty in the gene keys is that it teaches us how to use that shadow in a different way. So the way that I like to describe this to people is, if you think of the energy of excitement versus the energy of anxiety, those are actually the exact same energy inside of your body. However, how you choose to relate to that energy
mm,
dictates whether you have this nervous knot in your stomach, or whether you just can't wait to go and explore and engage with whatever that thing is that's coming to you.
mm.
And that's the difference between the shadow and the gift. It's the same thing. There is no difference to what's happening. It's just in what you're doing with that thing that's coming to you.
Well, that's so beautifully said, because I think there can be a propensity to shame and judge and criticize ourselves when we're like, gosh dang it, I'm in the shadow again.
Mhm.
I want to briefly share how the gene keys came into my life. And then I want to actually kind of scan out for a moment and just talk high level, your interpretation. And everyone's got a different interpretation, which is, I really resonate with how you share. What are the gene keys? And then we can talk about beginning the journey if people are curious, and then maybe how to understand the profile, and then we'll just see where the spirit takes us.
Sounds good.
Okay, so like you, I was introduced to it through one of my very best friends who is living in Australia, and early on into my awakening experience, which was really brutal and harrowing and all of that. I mean, it's nothing fun about being the caterpillar and the chrysalis and the butterfly. Like, that is gnarly. But he was able to be so connected to me in such a tender, potent time. And so he was leaving me all these messages on Telegram for years. We still have it going. He's, again, one of my best friends. He's in my fractal line, which you'll understand. So we're total soul tribe. And he's like, "Hey, soul buddy, you would really like this." And he shared a few links, and it was Gene Keys. And I was like, I tried so hard, because everything he sends to me is always so life changing for me, right? And I mean, like, but I thought it was boring. Those are the words that I use. I was like, oh, this is boring. The reason why it was boring is because I couldn't access that part of my consciousness that could slow down enough and actually pause to contemplate what I was trying to absorb. So I rushed past it like I used to do almost everything in life. And I just decided that it was not for me, right? Not for me. And then late January of this year, so 24, I was literally on my knees at my altar in my home, and I was asking God for help. My whole celestial court. Jesus was there. He's my true teacher in this life. I'm not the religious figure, like the true master teacher. And I was at my altar and I just said, I need help. I was in yet another thing with some family member. And I was like, I do the deep inner work. I'm more devoted than almost anyone I know, all that, right? I teach it. What is happening? I need help. And then about 5 days later, because we ask, teacher teachings, resources show up. Do we notice them? Like you originally, the gene keys in that first Aya circle. And then it was like, let's be more obvious. And still, sometimes ego will be like, I need a sign here, sign, right? The silliness of all of it. But at this point, I'd seen a workshop, and that's how I got reintroduced. And it was through breath work and some other things, but it was through a teacher that I had come to know and love and trust so much, Aaron Apke, who's been on this show. And he was facilitating this with two other people, Christopher August and another guy named Ryan. I can't remember his last name, sorry. And it was there that Christopher August introduced to me again the concept of gene keys. And at that point, I realized I'm here more for that than I thought the other workshop they were offering. And I was like, oh, wow, perfect, right? Because if it would have been gene keys and they like led with that in the marketing, I would have been like, yeah, not for me, because I was still associating it with past, right? But instead, it kind of slid in by just Christopher sharing his passion and how his life has shifted so much from the gene keys. So like you, very much a resistance, but of course, because spiritual ego, especially is the sneakster of all, is like, no way am I going to allow for an access point to completely and radically shift your life where you might not have a need for me. What I've now come to learn is that shadow and ego are one and the same. They work together. And when we can learn to actually embrace and not diminish or push down and try to numb out of, that they are really wonderful allies, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to share about my little bit of a journey. But if we had to scan out, and you were talking to people like you do, but they were 5, what are the gene keys?
Yeah.
Because
So
I'm
what you
sure our
just said
listeners have
brought
heard
up.
about it, but it's like, ooh, what have they done with it?
So what you just said brought up for me the fact that the gene keys are a wisdom stream, not a set of knowledge. So what that means is that
Love that.
they have a mind of their own, and they work in you when it's time and when you can allow that to happen. And so I think in both of our circumstances, the reason that it didn't click the first time is because the wisdom decided it wasn't the time. I'm not sure it had much to do with us entirely.
That is so well said. And you know what's so crazy cool about what you just shared that I fully resonate with is that at the beginning of every year, I always choose a one-word intention to fully embody. And my one-word intention for 24 was allow.
Beautiful.
And then literally weeks later, yeah. And wouldn't that just like, and today's the Lionsgate portal, right? The 888. And there's just so much potent energy. And irrespective of what people's beliefs or thoughts are on it, there's a lot of heightened sort of dense energy around it, right? And just that's exciting. And so I just thought, gosh, I was sharing with my groups and all of our little WhatsApp groups this morning of like, maybe because everyone's working with the gene keys, as I mentioned. And I said, maybe today would be a good day to just bring in one intention and to go to your gene key purpose. And what is the city of that? And even though we can't like cause that, we can feel into that essence. And how does that feel as a frequency running through my body and my being? And so mine is peace. It's gene key 6. And I was just like, oh, I feel so grateful to be able to connect with Jay on the Lionsgate portal. Where my intention is to be embodied in peace. Okay, so let's scan back out. What are gene keys?
So the other thing that I just want to touch on from what you said is this idea of a fractal, which ties intimately into the gene keys. And, you know, you mentioned your sort of soul guardians or the people that come with you or that get called in. And ultimately, the gene keys wisdom is based on the I Ching. However, it also ties in this fractal wisdom from 3 main lines, let's call it. The first one being Christ consciousness. So this is the path of love and forgiveness and compassion. The second path is the Buddha path, and that's the path of wisdom and stillness and peace. And then there's the third path, which is the path of Hermes, which is the path of transmutation and alchemy and learning how to transform these things. So the Gene Keys is a synthesis from all of this ancient wisdom and all of these ancient teachings. And the idea is that it works with three different components of your being. And the first is physical, and that's about finding purpose. It's about settling more deeply into your body, and that's what's called the activation sequence. And by settling more deeply into your body, like I said, which ultimately is a belief in God, a belief that you're safe, a belief that you're going to be okay, that then opens the door for you to move on to the next piece of the work, which is called the Venus sequence. And that's all about opening your heart and finding love in your life. And that, yes, could mean romantic love, but it also, and most importantly, means self-love. And then the third piece of the Gene Keys is finding prosperity. And there's a big difference between finding prosperity versus finding wealth. Wealth is an accumulation. And whenever we accumulate anything, we get this feeling of heaviness. Whereas prosperity is a flow, meaning what comes in goes back out and allows for the next thing to come back in. Prosperity is also a balance. There's a financial component, an abundant component to prosperity, but it's also about your relationships, and it's also about your relationship to God and just how grounded and peaceful and whole do you feel in your life, and how are you able to serve? Ultimately, that's the question at the core of the Gene Keys is how can I best serve the whole? And the way that the Gene Keys gets you there is to help get in touch with the fact that you are the whole and that we are all intimately connected. And therefore, by serving you, I'm serving me.
So beautifully said. Thank you for that. Yeah, that just opened up so many different threads that want to weave in. But before we kind of go there, how accurate have you experienced by doing this for the time that you have and those that you actually connect with? Because you got a lot of engagement on your YouTube channel. Is our time of birth and location of birth, because that's also how we discover or awaken to what. And then I'm curious, because I don't know if I've heard you say this. This is feels like it's a belief. It might be a knowing, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, is that I don't know if I chose it or God chose it, or we work together of like, okay, you're going to go back to school from Earth, and how do you want to evolve the most, right? Like, what are we here to refine in terms of the evolution of our soul, which ultimately, if we're a soul having a human experience, then really it becomes the evolution of humanity, right, on this planet. And so I look at the sequence of my 11 gene keys, because there's 64 total, which makes up the genome of all of humanity. And we have them all, right? But it's to what degree are we pinpointing these shadows, these gifts, these cities in this particular incarnation that will ultimately serve the evolution of my soul and be of the greatest service to all. Is that a way that you look at it?
Yeah. So maybe it might be helpful here to go into sort of the Gene Keys teachings around our soul and around incarnation. So part of this system is what's called the golden path, which basically is just a layout of your profile. And it's a way to go from sphere to sphere in order, quote unquote.
I'll just show
that said,
quickly, like most of us have probably seen this, but here's mine, right? So there's the 11 gene keys that are of my life, this life. Yeah.
And that said, part of that system, that profile is what are called pathways. And those are the lines that you saw there that connected the little circles.
I'll just be your Vanna White right now.
Perfect.
Forgive my need of a manicure.
So out of the very bottom there, that's the sphere of purpose. And coming up out of that, the next sphere is a sphere of attraction. Perfect. Thank you. And so the two pathways on either side of the sphere of attraction, one's called the pathway of Dharma, and the other is called the pathway of karma. And so your Dharma is basically exactly what you were talking about. It's the contract that you signed that you are here for in this incarnation, that it's basically your soul's journey, your soul's path, so that you learn the lessons that you're meant to learn. Then we come up to the sphere of attraction, which has a lot to do with the law of attraction and with manifestation and with things coming into our lives. And then coming out of that, we've got the pathway of karma. And karma, I want you to detach from what you might think karma is. A lot of people go to cause and effect. But in reality, the way that I see it is that karma is the inner workings that drives our Dharma forward.
Yes.
In other words, it's the people, places, and things that come into our lives to give us an opportunity to choose in alignment with our soul that moves us closer to walking our true Dharma. Mm. Now, as we come to the end of our life and we die, what happens according to the gene keys is all the good, all the light that you brought to the world gets sucked up into your soul and you take with you. All the shadow, all the things that you did that weren't aligned with love get kicked back into the collective and they sit in our junk DNA, right? 90% of our DNA, according to science, is what's called junk DNA, meaning it has no use. Mm. And the gene keys believe that is holding our ancient wisdom. That is holding all, like if you've ever heard of the Akashic record, all of that information is sitting there in that DNA. Mm. And so over time, our soul gradually becomes more and more refined, and we get more and more light throughout that process. So I just wanted to speak to that piece of it. And then to answer your question, as far as the actual profile itself, there are a couple spheres that are very particular, for example, to the time that you were born. The sphere of attraction is actually one of them.
Okay.
At the same time, go ahead. Yeah.
Quick question on the karma dharma pathways, and as it relates to what the name of the sort of general name of that gene key represents. Is then karma shooting off from attraction into IQ?
Yes.
Interesting. Wow. So is it rooted in attraction that then fuels the IQ, which is a way I understand it, and I'm barely into the Venus sequence. IQ, as the one sphere in the Venus sequence, is ages 14 to 21, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and it's kind of the mentality that we sort of cultivated then and our way of being in the world. And I certainly relate to mine 1000%. So where does the karma dharma, so is it dharma from purpose that infuses attraction? Mm-hmm. And then attraction, that pathway is karma. Mm-hmm. So let me see if I'm understanding this. So is it fair to say then, I'm learning on the spot, this is so great, that if I really get present to how my gene key attraction 50 with line 6 shows up, that if I can be with all of that, then I'm moving into more karma. And is that fair?
So think of it this way, right? We have our Dharma, our soul's contract or purpose. The sphere of attraction calls in the things that we need, and that's important. A lot of people that teach manifestation teach you that you can have everything that you want. And at some point you will, but it's not because the things are changing that are coming into your life. It's because your relationship to those things are changing. Yeah. Then we get to karma, which calls in the things that help us to walk that pathway out of the sphere of attraction. But then what happens is we have our IQ, our EQ, and our SQ. And think of that as a trinity almost. Mm. And that dictates how you respond to your karma. Mm. So as you said, your IQ is a mental patterning that you developed from 14 to 21. Your EQ is an emotional patterning that you developed from 7 to 14. And your SQ is a physical patterning that you developed from when you were born until you were 7 years old. Okay. And so those spheres dictate how we respond to the karma that is coming into our life. And it is by that response that either raises or lowers our frequency, which then calls in the next thing via the sphere of attraction.
Okay, I think I'm getting this. And I'm listen, the mind is very entrenched and very programmed, right? And especially with old belief systems, et cetera. So the unlearning is so big. So I'm so grateful to take all the time that it requires for me to just grasp this. And my guess is that a few years down the road, I'm going to have even new meaning, right? Because I'm just at another dimension of awareness. So then if I look at my attraction of 50, which is point 6, and I want to get into the lines with you when appropriate, but I also don't want to overwhelm anyone. So we'll just take a pause in a moment. But shadows corruption, and then we move up into the gift of equilibrium, and then up into the city of harmony. So now I'm understanding the potency of this attraction sphere, which is Dharma karma, just like kind of radiating out, right? Depending on what I do with it. But as I look at my life and getting older and been on the planet now for, 5 decades, I can see specifically just since I've really been doing this work, even just this year, strongest, year in business, strongest quality of relationships. Shadow comes up more acutely than ever, which is way wild. It feels like it's more intense than ever, but then so are the gifts in city, right?
Exactly.
So I'm just like, okay, so I'm not going to try to, judge myself. I mean, I will in moments, but I try really hard not to and just allow it to move through me. But I used to literally attract corruption. And then waking up to so much, quote, corruption in the world, who the biggest part of my dharma and karma is to be in the equilibrium and allowing it all to be.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, it's been so deep. And then once I do that, then I'm actually experiencing the city without any effort of just like divine order always, but not the bypassing of that, but literally being with it so that it's fully embodied and then I'm in the harmony of all of life, all of relationships, all of flow, finances, all of it. And that's more of where I am now than I've ever been. So this now I'm beginning to get this. Doesn't mean though that there's not tremendous like presence that's required in the contemplation and pausing, which I also want to get to. There's so much that I want to get to, but I'll just pause because I said a lot. So what came up for you as I was sharing some of that?
Yeah, one of the biggies is this idea of like constantly there being something new to notice or a different feeling that comes as you continue to engage with this wisdom stream, which again, it's working on you as much as you are working on it if you allow it to do so. And part of that journey that I've realized both in my personal journey and as I engage with other people is there's this process that happens where when we start, we're in a very intellectual space and it takes years sometimes to get out of that space, but everyone's just trying to learn the system and they're trying to understand what all of this stuff means and all of it gets stuck up here. But over time, what starts to happen is it'll come down into your heart and it'll come down into your body. And it's through that process that we can really let this stuff settle in. Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, talks about 3 different types of contemplation. So, and contemplation is just a mix of the meditative path and the path of yoga, right? So it's like a mix of emptiness and focus, if you will. And the way I like to describe it is if you're moving your hands around a box that's closed, that's got a secret catch somewhere, and you're just kind of moving it through your hands. And then all of a sudden that catch opens up and it's not necessarily anything that you did. You just found the spot at that moment. And that is the idea behind contemplation. So I can just put the city of one of my gene keys in my mind and just let it sit there and then be open for a while and just go into like a non-dual open awareness meditation and then go back to that city for a moment when it comes back in and you're just kind of bouncing between those two things. But so there's mental contemplation, which I think is what most people associate with. Then there's emotional contemplation, which is a layer deeper, which is about developing a relationship with your suffering, essentially. And then even lower than that is physical contemplation. And this is almost subconscious, and it has a lot to do with the literal physical structure of your cells in your body changing as this wisdom goes to work on you. And so our focus in the Gene Keys wisdom is to allow for that transformation to happen very slowly. Two big takeaways from the Gene Keys are patience and gentleness. It's going to take time, and the gentleness is with yourself. We just have to give ourselves time and be willing to accept who we are and what we've done and what we're capable of doing. It really takes some dedicated focus to sit with our capacity, because it's so much larger than we think it is.
Yeah. What would you say, looking at your own profile and any particular gene key, has given you the greatest shift of just awareness of your place in the world? Because coming from your background, there's not a whole lot of safety there. And yet now you represent so much safety. And I imagine it's through presence.
Yes.
Yeah. Presence heals. One of my plant medicine teachers speaks to that all the time. And he's so embodied in his 60s, and that is his greatest gift, And so I'm imagining, and I'm feeling it with you even through the Zoom, right? But yeah, how would you answer that? You're not a big favorites guy, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that the first one that came to mind was actually the 60th gene key, which is my purpose. And I'm going to not answer by giving you two answers. So the gene key of my purpose is limitation, realism, justice. And it actually ties intimately to the gene key system and astrology and religion and a lot of other quote unquote structures or systems. So the 60th gene key is about understanding that there's a balance between the structures of the world and the energy that is trying to come through those structures. And structures degrade. They're on this planet, and everything on this planet degrades in the physical realm. And the energy that is trying to come through does not degrade. It is eternal. So an example of this is something like the church, right? Where if we go back to the days of Christ, there was a very specific energy and presence that passed through him of love and of compassion. However, the structure of the church over thousands of years has turned into a dogma and turned into, and not universally, but largely a place of judgment and a place of you need to do it this way or you're doing it wrong.
Well, control and manipulation, through fear and scarcity. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I'd argue that Christ would be appalled at that.
Well, he was back then too.
Exactly.
Depending on which 2000th version of the Bible you've read that's been edited that many times, what I mean? So yeah, many know that. Yeah.
And so I think a big part of my purpose is to try and simplify things and get people back to the energy that is trying to come through. And that's my work with the gene keys, is to try to get people to understand. So going back to your question about birth time and profile and that, ultimately you get to a certain place in the gene keys where you realize every single gene key is saying the exact same thing in different words.
So true.
And so ultimately, the profile matters in that it helps our logical mind get a grasp on this and start to work with it. But eventually we get to a point where there's like a self-destruct mechanism that's built into the gene keys. And it comes when you recognize that it's about the energy, not the structure. And the same can be said with like astrology, where people get really attached to charts and details, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's part of the journey. And at the same time, that wisdom doesn't care what house, what planet was in when you were born. Like it's all about understanding that there is something that is dictating and guiding your life that you can trust. So that's one. The other one is my life's work, which for me is 32. So that's failure, preservation, veneration. And I like to liken failure here as a sense of panic, and not like a manic panic, like I'm terrified panic, but this underlying anxiety that there is something wrong and that my life could fall apart at any moment. Ultimately, failure ties to the fear of death, or I like to say the fear of non-existence. And what that teaches us, that shadow, because remember, every shadow contains a gift, is preservation. And what preservation means is instead of running away from failure, running away from that fear and that sense of unease to try and fill it or create safety, it's deciding, what do I want to preserve? What is actually important in life? And then the third piece of that is the siddhi, which we haven't talked about the frequency bands yet. Siddhi is a Sanskrit word that in this case, in the gene keys, basically means the divine expression of that energy. And so it's veneration here, which is just a deep respect and honoring for the spiral of life. And we get there because we recognize that all of life is so valuable and so beautiful, and there's no reason to run away or be scared of the quote unquote failure that we can see in our lives. And so that's another big part of what I'm here to do, is to try and help people live the lives that they actually want to live instead of running away from what they don't want.
And when you say live the lives they want to live, based on literally the design before we even emerged onto this planet in this life. Yes?
Absolutely.
Like what the soul longs for. Okay, so that really resonates with me as well. And what keeps coming up for me, and it's interesting because about 2 years ago, I started saying this, and I'm sure at that time I was so committed to that path, but it deepened in a way that I can feel it differently this year since I found really rediscovered the gene keys. And it's to be in divine integrity. It's the best way I know to describe it. Divine integrity with why I chose to be here. And all of these family members or key people in these fractal lines, all of these perfect people, other humans, other souls playing out these roles to help me refine. Like, so, and I don't know how you feel about that in your childhood, because for any child, that would be pretty brutal, right? Like, whoa, and the way that you described your very, very young childhood. And so how do you relate to that now?
So one thing that I'll say is, it's important to know that although, yes, this is your soul's journey, we need a way to connect with that in our day-to-day lives. And the way that you do that is through your heart. The way that you do that is to trust in the emotions that you have as things come up in your life. And so your relationships and the things that happen in your lives are your greatest teachers. This is the gene keys talk about relationship or the path of the householder as a spiritual path in its own right. So up until I found the gene keys, it was always like, go and become a monk or go to an ashram somewhere. And like, that was the spiritual path. But in reality, if we can change our awareness and change how we see our day-to-day lives, every single lesson, every single interaction that you have is an opportunity to become closer to God. It's an opportunity to live in alignment with how you should be living. That's the other thing. We try and outsource what we should be doing. We try and pretend like this is okay for now. But in reality, I'd say 99% of the time, we know whether what we're doing is what we're supposed to be doing or not.
Yeah, totally. That divine integrity thing yet again.
Exactly.
So then has that shifted how you relate to being a 3-year-old where your mother attempted suicide, being a 5-year-old little boy where your dad leaves the house? I mean, I imagine that informed, right? A lot of the insatiable, hungry ghost, right? That was just trying to fill up on something because you felt so abandoned ultimately by God, right? That's addiction 101. And I'm my big addiction this life was cigarettes, and I finally let go of them last summer when my soul actually came to me. Soul was always there, but like basically begged me in the middle of the night. And I was really sick, and I rarely ever get sick, but it had to go that way because it was like, you've got work to do. You have to let the body do its job. Please, begged me, please. It was such a beautiful moment. Tears are streaming. I'm so sick and I still wanted to smoke, that addicted, which is like heroin. And I just said, do I really have to? And my soul literally said, please. It was this beautiful connection. And so I understand that, right? Of like, do I belong? And it's all over my Venus sequence. And there's a gene key that even shows up twice, which I want to chat with you about. What happens when we're seeing like a double or a triple, or I don't even know what the most is that you've seen. But back to my original question, if you can even follow, like, did that shift just coming into this wisdom stream, how you relate to your childhood?
So it's interesting you use the term hungry ghost, and as it related especially to an abandonment from God, because my SQ, which as a reminder is tied to the opening of your heart, and it's developed from when you're 0 to 7 years old. The shadow there is hunger.
Wait, I want to look at mine really quickly. Oh, that's where I get two. The EQ and the SQ are the same. Discord 13.
Discord, discernment, empathy. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoo. Okay, but yes, back to you.
So yes, I went the majority of my life trying to fill that hunger. And then I would get to a point where I felt full. And then the only desire, the hunger then was to become empty. So it was like this insatiable, either way, it didn't matter, right? I always wanted the opposite. However, now, yes, I can see, and I'd be lying to say that I'm totally healed from those things. I'm not. That's just the reality of where I am. What I can see very clearly, though, is that those experiences give me a very strong ability to relate to many different types of people, many people that have struggled in their lives in various ways. And it helps me to get into resonance with people, right? If I had this perfect life and I'm talking to people that are in the midst of suffering, which I don't think very many people have this perfect life. We all suffer in various and different ways. We judge whose suffering is worse than somebody else's suffering, but ultimately only God can judge. Getting back to the 60th gene key, which the city is justice. And so I can see that it has a purpose, and I can see that it lends me this sense of trust with people, because they can see that I've walked this path. And going back to what you said earlier, I've known for years that it's not about what I say. It's about who I am, how I am when I'm around people. And that's what does the work. And part of that is my aura, which the Gene Keys talks about a lot as well. And my aura is affected by all of those experiences leading up to now. And so when I get into a room with people and they feel that energy and they feel that there's been a shift and a transition.
And we can feel it, by the way. I'll speak for myself, but also the 50 plus people I've shared your videos with who are pretty much all my clients and yeah, students. We can feel it across, any sort of virtual technology because it's energy, right? And so it's felt and known. I've been saying for quite a while that to the degree that someone knows themselves and is fully embodied and aware of shadow, gift, and city, right? Or whatever language people want to use before Gene Keys comes into their life, then that's to the degree that they can know anyone else, right? And so it's so easy for me to say this because I'm not living your life path, but Lord knows you're not living mine. And that's what gives us the ability to have empathy and compassion for one another, because none of us are walking this alone. But I can see it seems so obvious, like you had to and chose to go through that so that you can finally step into your truest calling in this life, which now has become very clear to you to teach this work. Yeah.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that this is also a stepping stone. I believe that there is something, I can feel it swirling around, just kind of waiting to find a form. And it hasn't come across quite yet, but for now, the Gene Keys are something that are the thing that are speaking to me and calling to me and the thing that wants to be shared to the world. And I know because of the Gene Keys and because of the trust that I'm in, that is the stone that I can see next along my path, and it will lead to another stone. I think it's important for people not to get sucked into, and I say this when I had my last business for 7 years, that was my identity. And so I'm very mindful of knowing now that I am not what I do.
Ooh, I am who I be.
Mhm.
Right? Yeah, I love that. Can I ask? I have so many questions, and I also realize we are probably at the original time. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'm good. I have nothing after this.
Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
amazing. Okay, we
Mhm.
won't go on too long because my listeners are used to about an hour, hour
Cool.
15.
Mhm.
Couple questions for personal reasons on my own profile. But before we go there, um, can you high level, and we'll link to your YouTube channel. And I think right at the top, it's how to read a Gene Keys profile. And
Mhm.
then like right next to that, it's like, what are the Gene Keys? So you gave a beautiful overview today to kind of wet the palate a little bit. This audience is awakening to so much. And so I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of people very hungry to, even if it feels complex, allow yourself a little bit of grace. Just know that it can be an easier, journey into it. But the lines are still very elusive to me. And especially around each gene key. And we get 11 in any particular incarnation, but we, of course, are intrinsically connected to all
Mhm.
64. But how would you say high level what the lines are for the all of the profile and how they sort of fit into this idea that we chose all of this for this incarnation?
So, just for some nuts and bolts, so that people know where to look if they want to go and look at their profile as we're talking, the what you'll see is a number and at each sphere, followed by a decimal point, followed by a second number. And that second number is the number of your line. And so there's 64 gene keys and there's 6 lines. And there is an interplay between the energy of the gene key and the energy of the line. And you combine those two almost to tell a story to see how that will express through you.
Mm.
Now, the 6 lines are the same energy across all 11 of the spheres. What is different is they get a little bit of a different flavor based on what sphere you are talking about. So to give you an example, the second line in the sphere of actually we'll go 6 line. The 6 line in the sphere of life's work is the line of the teacher, which is what I am.
And
So
I am. I'm
perfect.
45.6. Okay, perfect. Of course, you're in
um,
this work and I'm in this work.
exactly. Whereas the 6 line in the sphere of your evolution, which represents your greatest challenge in life, the thing that keeps coming back to you so that you can learn that lesson. So intimately tied to our Dharma and purpose. Um, that is the line of education and surrender.
Mhm.
So if you think about how those two come together, so in life's work, that's what you're meant to do in the world. So I'm meant to teach. And that these aren't literal things. That's important to know. You can teach in lots of different ways. You don't have to be a teacher to teach. But in order to be a teacher, I need education. I need to understand what it
Mm.
is I'm talking about. And I need to surrender because it takes a long time to have the wisdom required in order to teach people.
True.
So that's an example of how they sort of morph from sphere to sphere. And basically the first line is all about going within. It's all about being a creator. It's about security. It's the base of things, right? And so we dig down and we get with God and we come back out with something. The
I
second
love that. Get with God. So good.
the second line is the energy of the dancer. So it is this energy that flows with life and is very easy in the things that it does.
Mm.
The third line is the energy of the changer. So this is the energy that is going to have lots of different experiences in their life, some good, some not so good. It's kind of the line of trial and error, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth line is the line of community and the line of connection, the line of service. And all of these lines, we all contain all of these lines. That's important to know too. It's just that one has a little bit more bias than all of the others. The fifth line is the line of power. It's the line of the leader, the line of someone projecting an energy out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sixth line is the line of the mystic. It's the line of the sixth line. It has a different path than all of the other 5, and it's not any better or any worse. but it's more about seeing the vision of the future and understanding that we know, or understanding that there's a different way of operating in the world, and helping people to see that other way of operating. So it's at a shadow state, it's indifferent. It's like separate from everything else. But when it is engaged, that's what makes it a teacher, right? Because it can see this high level, big picture and share that with everybody.
Really well said. Now, was that an overview of, in general, the frequency of each line? Because they show up with different words depending on where it lands in your chart. Yeah.
Okay. Exactly. So that's like the overall, like if you were to apply that to each sphere, that would basically, it's always the same, that same thing. It's just like in the sphere of, let's use radiance, for example. The first line is solitude, and radiance is how you release your inner light, let's say. So first line is solitude. You need to spend time internally. Remember, I said it's about going within. The second line is marriage. And that doesn't, again, not literal. I don't need to be married to somebody, but it's engaging with another idea. So flowing with something, right? So that's how, even though they're different words, or what are called keynotes in the gene keys, in reality, it's because each sphere represents a different piece of your life. And so we're just using a word that's a little bit more specific to that area.
So well said. So it's interesting too, my radiance, and I've heard Richard Rudd say this, and I'd be curious what your thoughts are. He says of course he gets asked this question because it was the first question I had, which is, what's the best gene key to get? You know, the number, right? Like we're always looking for a hierarchy. Hilarious. Oh my gosh. And so he finally answered, and he was like, it's the radiance gene key. You know, the radiance. And I don't want to steal your thunder. I mean, I got you. How do you describe the radiance gene key?
Yeah. So radiance, like I said, is about this idea of releasing inner light. It is intimately tied to your aura. So it's basically the energy that you put off to the world that has a deep impact on the people that are around you.
Okay. So well said. So when I really got present to radiance gene key of mine, 36 line 2. So we just heard that's marriage. And it's when I'm in yoga, when I'm going to yoga, or I'm on trails and I'm in nature, or when I'm really communing with my animals, especially my pup, that's marriage, right? That's when I move out of turbulence, which is the shadow frequency, which I'm very, very familiar with. In fact, I thought it was just home, right? That's just how I am. It's always kind of turbulent inside. Think of like an airplane turbulence is the way Richard Rudd explains it. I didn't know there was a real other way to be inside. But yet when I'm in yoga or in flow and on my nature trails, I'm like, oh, this is very different. And then I move into humanity, which I love everyone when I'm in my gift of humanity. I love everyone. I love myself. I love you. I love everyone, which then brings me up to the greatest city for me that I love so much is compassion, you know? Yep. And in fact, earlier you were sharing multiple times, I got so teary-eyed and I was just like, my compassion, I could just feel like it was just like radiating out to you of just parts of what you've shared here today about your own personal journey. So that really lands. Thank you for that. Couple other things around what happens when you get two, or maybe, I don't know how many you've ever seen of like multiples, either in all of the whole profile or in the same sequence. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's it's more common than I think people think it is, especially to have two. I've seen circumstances of three. I've not seen four, but I imagine that it's possible. And I wasn't sure what to make of it either. So I tracked down what Richard said about it. And he basically was like, it is just a reason to spend more time contemplating that key. It requires more of your attention because it's something that's rooted deeply into your being in a couple of different ways. Like I have the 56th gene key in my radiance, actually, and then also in the sphere of my core. And so they are.
That makes so much sense. So your deepest sacred wound is also your radiance.
Exactly.
Whoa,
is also
that's
once
gorgeous.
transmuted what comes out into the world. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
interesting also, technically, I guess it's three spheres because the sphere of your core also, which your core is your core wound, your deepest wound. And it's not anything that happened in your life. It is there because you were born into this world separate,
Mm.
meaning before we came here, we were one. And then we're born, and all of a sudden we come out of the womb. And for the first time in this life, we're our own being, right? At a certain point, if you think about this, there comes a first time when you're still in the womb that you feel something.
Mhm.
And that feeling, that touch, that's the first time that something external to you differentiated itself from you.
Mm.
And
Mm.
from that moment on, we have this sense of separateness that we're trying to heal. And so that's what the core wound is. We're born into it. It's nothing that happened. And we all have to turn towards
Oh,
that suffering.
and it could be something that happened too. Like I was literally, are we talking about vocation? That's the
We're
core?
talking about, so core and vocation, that's what I was getting at here,
Ah,
actually the same sphere.
yeah, that's what okay, because on my profile, it shows up as vocation,
Mm-hmm.
but it's moving out of the Venus into the Pearl. But I've also seen, I think from you, that's the core is our sacred wound, and it might not have anything to do with what actually physically happened, but it also might. As an example, mine is 10.4, self-obsession shadow, moving into naturalness of gift and being, which is almost impossible to even articulate according to, well, me and Richard Rudd and anyone else, I'm sure. But when I was born, my mother was like 23, and like many babies still to this day, I had jaundice, so I didn't ever get to breastfeed or even be held by her. I was taken, she says, ripped from her and then put in an incubator for about 3 days. So the bright light, sterile environment, like definitely not in the mother's womb, and left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that self obsession. I mean, that was like it was almost like the shadow was running me to prove that I am so alone in the world. So alone in the world. Nobody loves me, not really. And I used to literally say that to my parents many years ago, but still it's like, you don't really like me. You just love me because I'm your daughter. Whoa,
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at my EQ and SQ, and we'll remind everyone what those ages are in the Venus sequence. And it's 13 showing up twice, which is, as we mentioned, moving from discord up to discernment into empathy. And my parents literally teach empathy as nonviolent communication facilitators, like worldwide. And that empathy is like the biggest thing, right? And I've always been like, I'm not, I don't want your empathy rhetoric, because I didn't believe it, right? I didn't experience it. And that was just my own journey, it has nothing to do with them. There's no blame or shame here. It's just what I'm experiencing the most from this. So I want to just share high level, like the greatest gift is to get me out of victim mentality
Mm-hmm.
or its beautiful best friend of martyrdom,
Mm-hmm.
and then that empowerment piece of I chose this, I chose them to be in my life path in those years. I also then chose those addictions, those vices to soothe the shadow that I didn't really know how to relate to any other way. But now I have more awareness and I can pause and contemplate and get whatever I get, right? Whatever wants and needs to come through that I'm available for in this moment. That's how I experience it. And every day it feels like a miracle, because the quality of my consciousness and feeling tone or frequency within has shifted so much that I don't even feel recognizable. My family and some of my closest friends say that. But yet I also know it's driving how I show up with my clients and my students. And there's more presence. And also my life's work, 45, at the very city level, it's communion and synergy is the gift. Dominance is the shadow. Imagine how that shows up. I used to try to control everything, and it's got to be my way or the highway. And even something as benign as a restaurant choice or a movie choice, like I let go of that years ago. But now I can really start to see, God, when I invite, like on retreat, the women, like, what would you like to do right now? Here's what was on the calendar. But what are you guys feeling you would like? I'm getting the chills as I say it, because it's completely changing my way of being in the world. I'm like, oh, I don't have to like constantly be hyper vigilant to control, i.e., dominate of my ways best, right? and I can invite others to have a seat at the table. And now we're in communion, not just other humans and sentient beings, but all of life and nature and the cosmos. I'm not trying to sound over the top here. I'm so sincere. This is how it really can be. So I just want to share that for anyone who's like, not sure. And this is just 7 months into my journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm like, wow, I'm in for life. You know, I don't feel called to teach it, but I want to share it as far and wide as I can. And I found, especially for you coaches, leaders, guides out there in the space, whatever work you're in, it doesn't even have to be like a spiritual teacher of any sort. This as a foundational tool to constantly be able to come back to, you don't have to guess with people that we're working with, right? Like we just see it and we're like, oh, I see. And how can we work together? Is that the way that you're seeing it too?
Yeah, totally. It's a very helpful tool to open a conversation. And one point on that, anyone that's working with people on the gene keys, or if you're doing your work on the gene keys and you want to look up your partner's gene keys or your boss's gene keys or whatever, that's okay to do. However, the goal is you look at that person's cities, not that person's shadows, right? Like, trust me, the person knows what their shadow is. They don't need help identifying that. Yeah. What they need help with is you holding through your aura that energy of divine grace that has an opportunity to work into them and change the course of their life. And by you holding that intention and staying in your heart as you're communicating, you know, the word communion and what this work allows us to do is, instead of constantly thinking and trying to control a conversation and what I'm going to be doing, I can just fall into my heart space and trust that the next words that are going to come out of my mouth are going to be what that person needs to hear, even if it makes no sense to me as I'm saying it.
Totally. I love that. So true. God, it's just so much here that I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, Jay. I'm like, oh my gosh, please hold a workshop or like an in-person retreat, like so we can just like small too, like 6 people. So that I'm being selfish here, but honestly, it's such a gift. This is in my own experience of life so far. I don't know what has been the greatest gift that has been presented on my path than the gene keys. You know, I'm so grateful to Richard Rudd being willing to take on, you know, this mammoth of a transmission that is still kind of confusing for my ego. Like, why isn't the whole world like just on this, and it just still like seems so small, but I know why. It's just we are evolving. This work feels pivotal, and we talked, I think, even about this before I hit record. This work is pivotal for the evolution of humanity, and I do believe that in our, at least in my lifetime, I'm going to see more and more and more people get interested and really get into deep study of this because of the shifts. You know, they are there and they can be there instantaneously. And I just also want to speak to how beautiful it is that you said, please, when you are looking up someone's profile, focus only on the city and really hold space for that. And it reminded me of something that I recently heard on a podcast. And unfortunately, I can't remember which one I listened to a lot, but it was about, you know, we've been told that our skin is our largest organ. And you mentioned our aura, which is also known as like our bioenergetic field. And most of us are not at all taking up the space that we have been given, right? And we minimalize, we stay hidden and out of, you know, sight, and for all the reasons that the shadow would, you know, have us do. And but our aura is our largest organ. And so that is so beautiful when I can actually visualize the aura of the city in frequency and how that feels, right? And how that radiates out. I love that image. So thank you for that. I had not heard that before.
Yeah, absolutely. And the aura is interesting because 1 + 1 = 3 when you account for the auras, right? There's my energy, there's your energy, but when we come together, there's this overlapping third thing. And that third thing is the thing. That's what we're designed for, that unity. And gradually, there's going to be more people, more things coming into that one unified field. And I think you're right. We're in a place now where more and more people are open to that possibility. And I think it's because the suffering is starting to take hold, right? It's starting to get really hard to function in the world without a connection to God or without a connection to something greater than yourself, because people are just at the end of their rope. And when people get to their end of the rope, this is the reason suffering's here in the first place. Eventually, people are going to turn within and they're going to start to recognize and realize that the change that needs to happen isn't a change to society. It isn't a change to our politics. And all of those things are not in great condition. I agree. However, the way that that change happens is by changing your heart. And when one person changes their heart, and is able to be open, then when I'm in relationship with somebody else, my aura is going to unlock their heart and then the next heart and the next heart. And that's how we look around and we're in a different world.
I'm so deeply moved by that. That for me is the real great awakening. It's moving into Christ consciousness, the Buddha, Hermes. You say Hermes?
Hermes. Yeah.
Not Hermes. Not the brand. Sorry. Hermes. The Greek god.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is such beautiful wisdom. And I'm so moved by that because nothing feels more important, And this is why I was sharing. My friend Ruby actually sent me a text similar to this, even though I feel this way deeply. But when she said it, I was like, yes, so grateful to have another sister on the path that totally gets this. So Ruby, if you ever happen to catch this, thinking of you, girlfriend. And she said, facing our shadows is pivotal for the evolution of humanity. And it just is. Many will continue to numb out, right, and to escape it through all the different mechanisms that I have empathy for, I'm just so grateful to be free of that. And if we together, our aura, our unified feel in this conversation can even help one person, just expand beyond the shackles of what feels so futile, especially at this time on planet Earth, then we have done our work, and that's all it's about for me.
Same. Yeah. It's all, how can I show up in service? That's the question that I ask myself every single day. It's that, and, please, God, use me as an instrument for grace. Those are the things I say to myself over and over again.
Well, you have done that today.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful for you. I want to share just briefly when I had discovered you through my friend Joanne. I had asked you to be on my podcast and you're like, let me think about that, and I was like, respect, and then you're like, let me just go and listen to a few of your episodes and see if this is fully in resonance. And then you came back like a few days later and you're like, okay, we can do this, And I just want to share that because you're not looking for this to be like known for this, or it's so authentically embodied. It's such a beautiful mission. And I also love what you shared. You're like, who knows if you'll be teaching this exactly in 10 years, but what we know is that when we totally surrender, which is part of your programming partner of life's work, right? The surrender and education, line 6 in the evolution sphere is we just like, all right, God, then show me the next step. Right? Help me, the next teacher, teaching resource. That's the path that I'm on. And it has totally been the most beautiful thing ever. That's what led me to Austin. It's just a wild journey and it requires a deep surrender. But when we are living there, then it's just like God totally provides.
Yeah. And facing your shadow and going into surrender is the hardest work that you're going to do in your entire life. To really and truly face your deepest wounding is incredibly painful and is something that takes a lot of time. So it's not just a quick in and out pain. We sit in it. And that's why sometimes people have a hard time with this work. I'm not promising sunshine and rainbows here, at least while you're actively doing the work. However, what starts to happen is the sunshine and rainbows start to blast their way through that suffering, and you notice them more and more and more until I think, and I'm not there, but I think there comes a point where that's what you're aligned with all the time.
What is the city of your life's work?
Veneration.
Yeah, veneration. So good. All right, we are probably at the close of this first conversation. So grateful for you and the living wisdom pouring through you. Is there anything you wish you'd been asked or that feels important to share as related to honestly anything?
I think just my ask for people is to commit to a period of time with this wisdom
Hmm.
and just see what happens. Surrender, be open. And if you need help along the way, ask me, ask Michelle, ask, it will change your life. So I know that wasn't a question that I'm answering, but I really just, I know that this work can help so many people.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I totally relate. And what's the best place for people to reach out and maybe learn from you, study with you, work with you one-on-one coaching? Definitely enjoy your YouTube videos, which are I love them because they're like some of them are like 25, 30 minutes. And it's just like, how do I understand the pathway from life's work, which is called challenge, into evolution? I just need that, Jay. And you
Mm-hmm.
got a video on that. Like literally everything I've ever wanted to really, really know and really break down, just like focused on one little aspect, which is mammoth. If you literally studied one of your videos for 5 years, you could learn something new every time you go in. So I just really want to honor the work that you're doing because you come at it from a place of like, I never, ever, ever would have thought about it in that way. And there are a lot of people, right, that teach it. And it's all about your own contemplation. But there's just something that I fully resonate with, that I'm able to just get it at a new level. So I want to thank you for that. But anyway, best place to reach you.
Yeah. So I would say go to the YouTube channel. The channel is Jay Cohen, just my name. And then from there, I do what are called wisdom calls. So this is a community call. I have anywhere from 15 to 40 people on the call that come in, and I really do my best to just organize a space for people to share their wisdom and ask questions that they're going through. So I really just try to facilitate. Of course, I'll chime in here or there, but it's a lot of co-sharing and co-wisdom that's happening there.
Wow.
And so that would probably be the best place to connect out of the gate is come look at the YouTube channel. Like Michelle said, there's lots of different, I have videos on spheres, on pathways, on lines, like all sorts of different stuff. And then each video I put out, typically I'll link to the next wisdom call that we do over Google Meet. So you can be anywhere in the world. We have people from all over the world. And then we can go from there.
Yeah, what a beautiful community too, right? To be on a path like this with others who get it, and who are devoted to getting it even more deeply. I can't thank you enough for your devotion to this path and for bringing this wisdom to us. I just believe you are a true gifted teacher, and I'm so grateful that you've, yeah, answered the call. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. My little tiny 2,500 person channel. I'm grateful.
Hey, it's the size of mine too. I mean, listen, I honestly, numbers do not matter. It is around the quality of those numbers. And yeah, in fact, I love, love, love nothing more than to find the gems, that don't have those big old followings, because one day they will.
Mhm.
And it's just like, I just love discovering people like that. And you are like a real gem. So thank you again, Jay. So
Absolutely.
grateful.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.